Hello, welcome back to LING 201, Introduction to Linguistics. I am your professor, Brett C. Nelson. Today we'll be talking about morphology. This is our first lecture on linguistic morphology. So within that, we'll be talking about categories of morphology, that morphology is interested in, and a specific type of morphology called derivation or derivational morphology. So the readings for today were the first three sections, or four sections, 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, from Chapter 4, the Morphology chapter of Contemporary Linguistic Analysis. Announcements for this week. On Thursday, discussion post 3 will be due. So this will be connecting phonology to morphology and morphology to anything else you want to talk about. On Friday, for extra credit, Article Evaluation 1 is due. There's information about that on our course website. And also on Friday, I will be posting the third quiz for our course, which will be due next Friday, and will cover all of morphology, so this week and next week's lecture. But before we get into this week's lecture, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We're here today, learning in the area where the Bow and Elbow Rivers meet in southern Alberta, a place known in Blackfoot as Mohkinstsis, a name now used to refer to the city of Calgary. This land lies within the territory of Treaty 7, which was signed by this land's stewards, representatives of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda. Additionally, this land is home to speakers of Cree and Ktunaxa, as well as members of the Métis Nation of Alberta, who speak Métis French or even Michif. So I'm a newcomer to this land. I come from Bobancha, the land of many tongues at the mouth of the Mississippi River, which is the name for the great river in Ojibwe. I strive to learn more about the land, its peoples, their languages, and their history every day. At the University of Calgary, I hope to contribute to and continue a journey of transformation and renewal in our ways of knowing, doing, connecting, and being, all with a spirit of truth and reconciliation for continued shared enjoyment of this beautiful place. So, on the docket for today, we'll be defining the key terms of morphology, which is the study of word structure. Morph being the word for form, the study of form and the study of form in language is the study of the word form, its structure. So then we'll outline various types of morphemes and allomorphs. So you might recognize, or that might call back to what we talked about in phonology. There are similar structures within morphology of morphemes and allomorphs, analogous to phonemes and allophones. And then we'll wrap up by discussing derivational morphology and an offshoot of that, which we'll call compounding. So up to this point, we've talked about sounds, we've talked about syllables, but really, if you just say a certain syllable on its own or a certain sound on its own, you aren't really communicating any meaning other than the sound. It's the sound of the sounds themselves. They don't, and that's because sounds and syllables don't inherently carry any meaning. They only make up the pieces of what actually does, and those pieces are words. Words are units of language which inherently carry meaning. So words are what's permanently stored in a speaker's lexicon, and so lexicon is a mental dictionary that accompanies the grammar of a language. So when you know a language, you know words in its lexicon. There's various studies on how many words you actually know, but there's at least 60,000 words stored in your English lexicon. So for example, we have a word like cat, has its own lexical entry in your mental dictionary, but so does a word like catalog. However, you don't just keep track of whole words, you also keep track of parts of words and parts that can be added to words to affect their meaning. And so these subparts and the rules that govern how you combine all of these parts into forming the words is your languages and your linguistic ability of morphology. So this is the part of grammar which is concerned with words and the formation of words from other words and word parts. So yeah, the study of this part of the grammar is also called morphology. So it's the study of words and word formation in languages of the world. So what is a word? Well, you're not going to find out in this course, I'm sorry. Words are escapingly difficult to define. They vary in language to language. Even within a language, they don't have really set fast rules. But for a working definition, we'll start with this. So words we'll define as the smallest free form of a language. So these are the units of language that can meaningfully stand on their own without anything else. They have a meaning on their own. That's a free form is something that can stand on its own, and so the word is the smallest free form, but larger free forms are phrases, multi-word units, and sentences, multi-phrase units. So yeah, words are the smallest free form of a language. An example of a word in English would be human. So you should be able to have some sort of meaning in your mental lexicon. I won't define them here, but human is a word. It's a small free form of a linguistic unit. Another word are names like Louise. So here's Louise saying Louise with her whiteboard. Another word could be supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. So if Louise wanted to write that on her board, she could have, and I of course made headcanon that she did write supercalifragilisticexpialidocious to teach the alien in Arrival the English word supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. So I'm sure this is definitely not an exhaustive list of the words in English, and I'm sure many other words can come to mind if I just ask you to think of words. Even if I put you on the spot, you would be able to come up with some words. So yeah, you could think of some other words that you know when you know English or any other language. They all have words. And many words can be broken down than just how we have them here, human, Louise, or supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. They are free forms, and they're single free forms. However, they do have internal structure that we can break down and analyze, and that is what we'll be doing today in morphology. So when we break down words into meaningful subparts, we get morphemes. So morphemes are the individual parts of simple and complex words. So when we put a bunch of morphemes together, we'll get words. And you put a bunch of sounds together, you get syllables. And if you want to add meaning, the smallest meaningful unit of language is the morpheme. They might not stand on their own though. So words can contain one, two, or many more morphemes within them. So for example, we have a word like dress. We also have a word dressed. So this person has dressed this child. That's another word. And then we have undressed. I won't show you a picture of that, but here we could see we have a word dress, and then we could add something to the end, or we could add something to the beginning. And those some things that we added to the beginning and end aren't words on their own, but they are morphemes nonetheless. They are meaningful parts. You can ascribe a meaning to un, or ascribe a meaning to the ud of dressed, the t, I guess, of dressed and undressed. And so these morphemes, these meaningful units, are the objects of morphological analysis. There are several types of morphemes, and we'll be going over them this week and next. So there are free morphemes. These are the morphemes that can be words on their own. So the example we have above, dress, is a free morpheme. It can stand on its own as a word. You don't need to add anything and to make it be able to stand on its own. It's a free morpheme. freestanding. But there are also bound morphemes. So bound morphemes are those morphemes which can't stand on their own. They must be attached to another morpheme. So in the examples above, we have the ud. We spell with ed, but it's pronounced in various ways. In this case, it's pronounced like a t. So the t in dressed is a bound morpheme. It's a suffix, and we'll talk about suffixes and prefixes in a bit. But the t is a suffix where the un is a prefix. It attaches before the free morpheme that it's attaching to. So usually bound morphemes must be attached to another free morpheme, but not always. Sometimes two bound morphemes can attach to each other in order to form a word. So all that's required is they just have to attach to another morpheme, plain and simple. Whereas free morphemes don't need that, or aren't subject to that requirement. They can be pronounced within a phrase or a sentence without any attachment, and they have meaning on their own as well. However, this doesn't always translate across languages, whether a meaningful unit, the meaning of that unit translated to another language might be a bound morpheme in another. So we have a word like dress. In another language, it might be a bound morpheme. You might have to possess that dress because it is an object that you have to possess. It's clothes. A clear example of that might be parts of the body or family. So these are units in English we could talk about just on their own without being possessed. But in other languages, a lot of indigenous languages of North America, you have to possess the body parts or possess the family members by adding a possessive morpheme to those nouns in order to make them pronounceable in the language and usable by a phrase or a sentence. So just because dress or bone or head or husband is a free morpheme in English doesn't mean it's going to be a free morpheme in another language. It might be bound, but not always. It could be free as well. So you just have to learn the intricacies of each morpheme that you learn in a language and the rules that govern them. So I did mention briefly in the previous slide, but also in the last slide, morphemes and allomorphs. So this is a kind of callback to phonology when we talked about phonemes and allophones, where a phoneme is a single category of a sound which has multiple allophones, which are different instantiations of that sound depending on its environment. With a morpheme, you have a single category of a morpheme with a single meaning that has multiple surface forms when it's being pronounced. So these are just like phonemes. You have morpheme is the phoneme as morpheme is the allomorph as phoneme is the allophone. So it's a very simple analogy like that. So allomorphs are the surface forms of a meaningful morpheme. So if we were to break down an example like inedible or immobile or illegal, we see we kind of have an intuition about there's kind of two parts to each of these words. There's that beginning part, the in or the im or the il, and then there's the more meaningful part that gives you kind of the basic meaning to which the in, the im, or the il is attaching. And that in, im, or il are all allomorphs of a single morpheme, which means like a negative. Inedible means it's not edible. Immobile means it's not mobile. Illegal means it's not legal. And so we see they have a similar form, but not identical forms. And so this is it's different allomorph. These are different allomorphs of a morpheme. And here's another one, irresistible. So not only is it in, im, il, there's also ir, and it all depends on what the following sound is. So as I said, these all share negative meaning, and they all share the same morpheme in. And that in, the n sound in, changes to an M when it's followed by a labial sound, an L when it's followed by an L, and an R when it's followed by an R. Everywhere else, it's just in. So we can describe these things in very similar ways to how we described and wrote rules for allophones. We could write rules for allomorphs. And really, it's just to describe how the morpheme changes to match with its environment. So this is just one example of allomorphs with a shared morpheme, with the in morpheme. Other allomorphs in English are the an. So it depends. That's the indefinite article in English that you use before nouns. Whether or not you have an N depends on whether there's a vowel sound at the beginning of the next word. If there is a vowel sound, then you have the N, and if there isn't, it's just or a. Another morpheme that has various surface allomorphs is the plural suffix in English. So plural, when you pluralize a noun to talk about more than one, you add what we do in writing with S or ES. However, it actually has 3 different sounds that it can make, whether it's a Z sound or an is sound. So we have like cats, flags, or what's one? Axe is an axe versus axes. And so these are all examples of phonologically conditioned allomorphy, and you can describe them in just the same way that we described conditioned allophony, however you want to pronounce it, with rules that talk about what sounds are in the environment and which sounds are changing to match that environment. But for the majority of this lecture and next, we'll be analyzing the word structure kind of independent of that relationship with sound. So morphology is about analyzing word structure. When you're talking about sound, then it becomes more of morphophonology. You're just combining morphology and phonology. So let's get down to analyzing word structure. How do we do this? Well, first we have to come up with a set of categories for us to sort all of our different types of morphemes into. And so first we have to classify our various morpheme types that we observe that languages are distinguishing in how they handle them. So first we'll start with roots, and roots are the core meaning and the foundation of a word. They can be free or bound, like I said, a shirt or a bone or a head or a husband or a spouse. These are all free morphemes, but they could be bound and require possession in another language. So roots are the core meaning of a word, but they don't necessarily have to be free like most of them are in English. They can be free or bound depending on the rules of the language. So these roots typically fall into a lexical category. This has previously been called a part of speech. So these are things like nouns, so persons, places, things like dogs, thoughts, etc. Then we have verbs. These are what we typically classify actions into. So run, teach, live, etc. And then there are adjectives. These are descriptive properties which describe typically nouns. And so these are things like big, red, round. You could think of plenty of other adjectives as well. And then there's something that's a bit harder to define. You can't really point to them in the real world, but because they kind of necessitate talking about more than one thing at a time. They're relationships between objects, and these relationships are called prepositional relationships, and the words that describe them are called prepositions. And so examples of prepositions are over, under, in, etc. So there's a set of these in English. So on this slide, the dogs are above the apple, which is on top of the rope. So you definitely have used all of these lexical categories before, because these are all lexical categories which English makes plenty of use of. So those are our 4 basic lexical categories that we'll be talking about today: nouns, verbs, adjectives, and prepositions. And so lexical category or roots start out in one of these lexical categories, and we'll talk about how we can change between them in a bit. But first we have to talk about another morpheme type, and that is the affix. So these are typically on the same level as roots. Languages typically contrast roots and affixes as their 2 main types of morphemes. And so affixes are always bound. They must be attached to something else, usually a root or a stem, which we'll define in a bit, but a stem is a combination of a root and an affix that is forming a larger unit. So, but affixes are always bound. They must be attached to something else. They don't necessarily, because they're not freely pronounceable, they don't necessarily and neatly fit into lexical categories. But they do have some connections with each of them, of the lexical categories that we talked about in the previous slide. So affixes are classified based on the location that they're attaching to what they're attaching to. So I briefly mentioned this previously, but a prefix is an affix which attaches before a root, to the left of the root as we write it in IPA or as we write in English. So an example of a prefix is pre, is a prefix. That means before. Un is a prefix, which kind of means like the reverse. And bi is a prefix, which means to. It's a Latin or probably a Greek prefix that means to. So we could see these prefixes attaching to roots or stems with prefix. So the root of prefix is fix, and the prefix is pre. And then we have undo. The root is do, the prefix is un. And then we have bidirectional. The stem here is directional, and the prefix is bi. We know this is a stem because there's also a suffix on the end. And we'll talk about suffixes here. So suffixes are attached after the root. And so as we write them, they attach to the right of the root, suffixes. So English has a few suffixes as well. We talked about one of them and seen a couple others as well already, but I'll outline them here. So here we have the S plural. So if we have that in suffixes, we said it as an allomorph of a Z, so suffixes. We have the ed past, and this also has some allomorphs, but we typically write it with ed, and so that's the ed that attaches to cook to turn it into a past tense, cooked. And then there's also li on this slide. So happy, we had a root happy, and then we added li to the end, we get happily. So in the manner of being happy, in the manner of happiness, happily. So those were all different English suffixes which attach after the root, to the right of the root they're attaching to. So affixes come in English in 2 flavors, the prefixes and the suffixes. There are other types of affixes that attach in other locations. English doesn't make common use of them, but they do exist in languages of the world, so I'll just go through them pretty quickly here. So affixes that attach in other locations, we have the infix, which attaches inside the root. So we have a root that can stand, that might be able to stand on its own, but you just insert some segments in between that have a meaning that adds to it. To explain this, I'll link to this video. I won't play it here, but I'll put it in the link in the description. I'll also play it for you live when I do lecture live, but for this video, I'll just link that video here. So once you've watched that, you come back with a better understanding of possible infixes in English. It's a rare one, but it does differ from just having multiple suffixes. So in English, we can have multiple suffixes attached to a single root, but that's different than having an infix. If we do have multiple suffixes, we just have them kind of stacking. The point of an infix is you're attaching it inside a morpheme, in the middle of the morpheme, not between boundaries. So an example of multiple suffixation would be anti-disestablishment, airy, in, ism. We have multiple suffixes attaching one after the other. That's very different than if we were to put an infix, establish. If frickin' establish would be an infix, not a prefix or a suffix, because the only way we can describe the infix is being inside the stem or the root. Another type of affix is the circumfix, and these are bipartite, or parts that are affixes that are made up of two parts. Typically, one is a prefix and one is a suffix, and that's why circum meaning around. So they kind of go on either side of the stem or the root to surround it, circumfix it. And the key thing with circumfixes is that they must always appear together. If they don't always appear together, then what you have are just a prefix and a suffix that just happen to be next to each other. Circumfixes, on the other hand, have to always appear. If you were to attach one half of it, you have to attach the other half of it in order to get the desired meaning of that circumfix. So there's none in English of these, and no quick videos that I can point to. But in a closely related a closely related Germanic language, we have the past participle circumfix. So we have ge, and then the verb root, and then de or te. And this gives you the meaning that in English we typically just have the ed or an en suffix. So that it would be a circumfix because we have the g at the beginning and the de at the end. So it surrounds what it's attaching to. But these are quite rare, so I won't focus on these too much in English. To draw out our structure, though, we need a way to diagram the structure, to kind of visualize the structure as we are analyzing it. So we have trees. Just like in phonology, we can map morphological structure using tree structures. And so for these slides, I'll be color coding the base or the root or the stem, whatever the affix is attaching to. We'll call a base here. And that will be in red, whereas the affix will be in blue. And when they come together is when they actually form that stem, which is made up of a base plus an affix. So it's stemming off into a different word. So here we have a word colorize. And so we have the base color, and we're adding an affix, in this case a suffix eyes, to the end of it. When they come together, they form the word colorize. And so that's the stem, colorize, because it's made up of the base, which happens to be a root, color, plus an affix eyes. So stems, this is where things can get confusing. Stems can serve as the base form for another affix, in which case you're doing multiple affixations onto bigger and bigger stems. And each of those stems is the base for the next affix. And so when that happens, everything turns red because it's the new base. Then we add another affix. So here we have colorize as the base, and then we're adding a D to the end in the spelling, and that's how it's pronounced, colorized. And then when we do that, we get another stem, or another stem. And so we put them together, we get the new stem colorized. And as I said, this could go on and on. So this stem can form as the base for another affix. So this colorized turns into our new base. We could add a prefix this time with recolorized. So this re is a prefix which attaches to the left. And when that happens, we get a new word, a new stem, recolorized. And then so we have, when this happens, we get a whole new stem. So everything becomes purple. We have a stem all the way down. So for most languages of the world, they typically are adding affixes to bases in order to form bigger and bigger words. And so this is called concatenative because you're concatenating kind of linearly prefixes, roots, infixes, suffixes, circumfixes, kind of in a linear process. This is called, and that's, when you do that linearly, it's concatenating, and so that's concatenative morphology. So there are several types of concatenative morphology types. We have word-based concatenative morphology, where the roots carry the core lexical meaning. These are usually free, unbound morphemes, and they are pronounced without any affixes. So eat is a root that has a meaning as a word on its own. But this can be suffixed with an affix, or a suffix, yeah. So she eats. So this is an example of word-based morphology. We formed a new word from a smaller word. Eat plus s is eats. And so specifically, this is an agreement suffix that allows verbs to agree with the subject, their subject, the third person singular subject, she. So s makes eats agree with she. However, there's also morpheme-based concatenative morphology, where roots are bound morphemes. So I've hinted at this throughout. The roots still carry the core lexical meaning, and that's how we're going to define roots, as just carrying core lexical meaning. However, they are bound, and they need an affix to form a pronounceable word. To point to a nearby example with Spanish, we have a root com. It's not pronounceable on its own. That's why we have that asterisk there to indicate that it's a bound root. It is a root that it does have a meaning. It means to eat. However, it's not a word on its own. It needs an affix. And so you can add er to the end, comer, and it means to eat, kind of a non-finite or an infinitive form of the verb. Or you could start to inflect it for various agreements or other meanings. So you can add n to the end to get they eat with comen or comen. Sorry, with the stress. Comen is they eat. So depending on the affix, you get different meanings combining with that root, eat. And so those are two different possibilities within concatenative morphology, whether you're adding affixes to roots or words that are already words on their own, or whether you're adding affixes to roots that are not words, which are bound morphemes, like the Spanish verbs are. You need an affix in order to pronounce the verb as a word. However, concatenative morphology isn't the only large group of morphology. It is very much the most common. However, it doesn't have to be concatenative. Morphology does not have to be concatenative. It could be non-concatenative. And so this is a type of morphology which doesn't necessarily use affixes. It more uses morphemes on different tiers, and they just kind of slot into together to form their words. We'll see, I'll give some examples here in a bit. So the tiers combine together to form the actual pronounceable surface structure of the word, but they're made up of kind of puzzle pieces that can slot together. For an example of this is many of the Semitic languages, including Arabic and Hebrew, they use non-concatenative morphology. So the way they talk about these languages is they have the consonantal roots. So for example, you have the three-letter root KTB, KTB, which has a kind of a base meaning of writing, and depending on the vowel morpheme that you add to it, you get different words. So this vowel morpheme can kind of slot. You have various different vowel morphemes which are made up of just the vowels, and these come in and slot into the KTB root to form different words. So here we have on the left, we have U and E, which is an affix, as they call it. Has been, it's the vowel morpheme. So you see here, and we get kutib, it has been written, where if we take those vowels away, we could now add a different set of vowels to get kataba, which means wrote. So in Semitic languages, they use non-concatenative morphology to get their lexical meaning of the core meaning of roots, which use consonants, and then the different vowels that slot in together are technically affixes, which add grammatical meaning, like past tense or has been, or right, or someone who does this. So just different add different meanings to that core meaning of right. And so they're like kind of like different modules or infixes that just slot in here together. At a tier on a totally separate level from the consonants. Instead, they're just vowels that can be just go into any different consonantal root. So if you were to find another three-letter consonantal root, you could add and in this way you would get the past tense of that verb as well. So that covers the broad categories of morphology and just the different, basically, houses of morphology and different ways to do it. But within that, there are also, again, different types of morphology. So here I'll define two different types of morphological processes that add different kinds of meaning to their bases when you carry these processes out. The first of these is called derivational morphology, which we'll be working on in today's lecture. Whereas the second of these is inflectional morphology. So derivational morphology is kind of big. You're changing big picture parts of the big picture meaning of the word, whereas inflectional is you're adding slight nuances to the information that's already there. And we'll give better definitions in a bit, but that's what we'll go with on this slide. So just today, though, we'll be talking about derivational morphology. So let's zoom in on derivational morphology. So with derivational morphology, we have affixes that are creating new meanings that are significantly distinct from the base that they're attaching to. One way they can do this is by changing the lexical category of the base. You could come up with examples on your own, but I'll give you this example. We have the ER suffix, which turns verbs into nouns. So it's kind of changing the meaning from verb into the doer of the verb. This is also called an agentive, the agent of that verb it's talking about. So this turns the verb into a noun who does that verb. So in practice, this would be turning write plus into writer, or fight plus into fighter. And so, as I said, this turns the base verb with the affix into a new noun. So it changes the lexical category completely from verb to noun. So we get the noun fighter. Another derivational suffix that changes the lexical category in English is eyes. We saw this previously with colorize. So this turns adjectives or nouns into verbs. So the key point here is that it's a verb forming suffix. And the meaning it gives, it means to make or cause that adjective or noun to be. So an example of this would be jeopardy plus eyes. So the base noun jeopardy plus eyes turns it into the stem meaning of a verb, jeopardize, meaning to cause to be in jeopardy. Another example of the eyes suffix, this time turning an adjective into a verb. We have real, an adjective. You're adding the eyes suffix, you get the verb, the verb realize. So to cause to be real. And so we can schematize this into turning adjectives and nouns into verbs. And if we want to see a tree like that, it looks just like that. If we just change the different category labels to match what we're looking at. So we have, if we were to draw it for realize, here we have the adjective on the left, the affix on the right. Real plus eyes equals the verb realize. So this is how we talk about derivational morphology that changes the lexical category. However, not necessarily, however, a continuation of that, as a fun fact, all of the English category changing derivational morphology suffixes are suffixes. They're not prefixes. So if you see on this page, this slide, all of these are suffixes because all of the category changes in English are suffixes. This doesn't need to be the case. Languages just have preferences for where certain morphology happens on their words. English just likes their category changing derivational morphology as suffixes. Some might be prefixes, some might allow them on both sides. It all depends on the language. So this was one of the types of derivational morphology, is the category changes. Another category changes the core meaning without changing the category. And so this is just turning nouns into another noun with a distinct meaning, or verbs into another verb with a distinct meaning, or adjectives into another adjective with a distinct meaning. And so an example of this would be the prefix anti or anti. So this takes an adjective or a noun and creates a meaning which means against that adjective or noun. So if we start with a base racist and we add anti to the beginning of it, what we get is anti-racist. And that means against racists, or against racism. So someone who is against racism is anti-racist. You could do the same with war. So we have a noun here. And this noun, war, it can be prefixed with anti, and you get an adjective. This time it actually happens to change the category. But if you were to start with the adjective like you have with a racist, so an anti-racist person, a racist person, an anti-racist person, we're just changing an adjective into an adjective, but sometimes you could change that noun into a different adjective. Whatever you're doing, you're changing the core meaning of that base when you go from base to stem. A better example maybe of changing the core meaning without changing the category is the LING suffix. nothing to do with linguistics. This suffix takes nouns and creates a new noun, which means small version of that noun. So if we were to play StarCraft, you would have zergs, and the small zergs are called zerglings because their ling is when you add ling to zerg, you get a small zerg, and that's a zergling. You get this a bit closer to planet Earth with duckling, which was formed from duck plus ling. So duckling is a small duck. You get duckling. So again, if you were to draw these trees, depending on whether it's a prefix or a suffix, that's the position of the affix. So with suffixes, the affix is on the right. With prefixes, the affix is on the left in our tree. And that's how we define prefixes and suffixes. So we see here the tree for duckling. We have a noun being suffixed with ling, and we get another noun at the purple stem level. Here we have anti or racist being prefixed with anti, and it's forming an adjective, anti-racist, at the stem level. So this is really the core of morphology, as we'll talk about it for derivational morphology, is these trees for we're taking smaller units of morphemes or bases, and just spaces are getting enlarged by adding prefixes or suffixes to them in our tree to get to a larger and higher level of analysis. So those are pretty simple derivations. Here we'll talk a bit about complex derivations. These are the cases where derivation applies or affixation applies multiple times recursively. So these can create quite complex structures, which kind of use these trees, but recursively. So we'll see that here. We have color and to colorize. And so if we were to draw that morphological process in our trees, we would have that basic triangle, color and eyes, turning into colorize. But we could also prefix this with recolorize like we saw, and we would just basically do that again, using colorize as our base and adding the prefix re to the left. We get another verb meaning recolorize. So these are, first we turned a noun into a verb, and now we're just changing the meaning of that verb with another prefix. So recolorize is our new stem, made up of a root and a suffix, and now a prefix. We can further derive this by changing the category of that verb back into a noun. So we could have recolorization. So we add the ation suffix to the end of this new stem, our base being recolorize. And then we add ation, we get recolorization as a noun, which we form from a verb, which we form from a verb, which we form from a noun. So this is tracing basically our swapping back and forth of the lexical categories, N, V, V, N. And so this complexity, whenever you have complexity, you can get possible misinterpretations or confusion, depending on how you're processing the order and the location of the different affixations. So I ask you this, is unhappiness unhappy plus ness, or is it un plus happiness? So think about that for a second, and think about what the trees would look like for each. Well, here are those trees. They're in the book, and one would have the final suffix ness as at that outermost level. So you start with the adjective happy, you add un to form unhappy, and then you add ness to form the noun unhappiness. However, if you start with happiness, and you add un to it at the outer level, that means you're starting from an adjective, adding the noun forming suffix ness with happiness, and then adding un to the beginning of that to change it into basically its opposite, the opposite version of its noun. And that's a type of derivation. And both of these, only one of these is actually valid. Un doesn't actually attach to nouns. If you try to attach un to another noun, you wouldn't get it to work. So un cat, un house, un whatever. Un doesn't actually attach to nouns. So it must attach before we have our base becoming a noun. In other words, it has to be at the closest level to the adjective, where it's forming an adjective from another adjective before the ness can actually turn it into a noun. So B is actually an invalid derivation because un doesn't attach to nouns. So if you went that route, I'm sorry, you're incorrect. The only possible derivation for unhappiness is tree A. But what about unlockable? I won't draw that tree here, but I'll give you that just think about outside of class. We might come back to it in discussion section later. So this is, again, to show you that the order of your derivation matters because of the rules of the morphemes. Some affixes just don't attach readily to certain types of words. So you have to, when we do get that affix in a word, it kind of shows you the right path and the way to it has been derived. So as I said, languages can constrain where and when and how they're deriving new words from old words. And so we'll talk about some of those constraints or limits for derivation here. So sometimes the pre-existence of another word that means basically what that word is, what the possible word is trying to mean, that existence of another word can block a derivation. So we have a word chef. We also have a word cook. These happen to mean kind of the same thing, but they mean someone who does cooking, right? So we already have a word for someone who does cooking. So in order to, if we were to add that er suffix, we saw that the agentive suffix that we had for fighter, we would get cooker. But as an English speaker, you know that the word chef and cook already exists to give that meaning. So cooker is an invalid derivation because we already have a word that means what it would supposedly mean if we were to allow it. So we don't allow it. We just use cook as a person who is cooking. Another limit on derivation is that some affixes only select particular phonological forms. So we have a verb forming suffix en, which only attaches to some monosyllabic roots. I don't give any examples of this, but like whiten. So to cause the white to become white is whiten, or blacken, but you don't get it with yellowen. You can't do that. You just don't. That's just a restriction on the verb forming suffix n. It likes monosyllables, but only some monosyllables. So you can't say like raw-in, thaw-in. Only very specific monosyllabic roots with one syllable allow en derivation into a verb. Another constraint is that, or limit, is that others only select particular parts of the lexicon that they can attach to. So in English, this typically has to do with the etymology of a word, actually. So there are some affixes that derive from Latin that only attach to other Latinate roots or bases.
And so it's just a selectional property of those Latinate suffixes or prefixes that they really only like other Latinate morphemes. So there's also the effects of morphology on phonology. So some morphemes can create phonological changes. So this would fall into our class of morphophonology. And we can categorize these in several ways, and the book has. So class 1 affixes, these are those that affect phonology deeply. So they change the segments or they shift the stress of the word. So we have a root like or stem like a base / stem Democrat, and we add E to the end. Not only are we shifting the stress from the on Democrat to the O in democracy, you're changing that T to a C or a S sound. So you go from T to S in democracy. So this E suffix happens to change not only the stress, but sometimes it changes the actual pronunciation of the final segment that it's attaching to. Class 2 is made up of affixes that are actually phonologically neutral. And so these are those that don't shift stress and don't change the pronunciation of a segment. And so we saw some of these already, like unfinished versus finished versus unfinished. The pronunciation is exactly the same, except you have un at the beginning. Less, home plus less is homeless. Again, you're not changing anything with home, you're just adding less to the end. And another one of these is ish. So she's blonde-ish. You're not changing the stress is still on blonde. You're just adding the ish to the end and not changing anything to do any of the segments of the base. So these are neutral or class 2 affixes. And a rule regarding the order of attaching these is that you must attach all class 1 affixes before you attach any class 2 affixes. So you have to always attach any of the stress shifting or segment shifting affixes before any of the neutral, phonologically neutral affixes can apply. That's just a way that English is with regards to its types of affixes. So that does it for derivation, but there is still some aspect of morphology that significantly changes meaning that I would like to talk about today, and that is compounding. So as an English speaker, you should be somewhat familiar with compound nouns or compound words. They are the result of a morphological process. However, they don't necessarily involve what we've talked about just so far with just roots and affixes. In fact, they might involve 2 roots or 2 bases. You're not actually adding an affix to anything with these. You're just putting 2 roots or 2 stems that already have their affixes together to form a compound. This is called compounding. In English, this almost always creates a noun, an adjective, or a verb. So the book gives you a bunch of examples with these tree diagrams, which are really quite simple. You have a noun and a noun forming a noun. You have an adjective and a noun forming a noun. You have a verb and a noun forming a noun. You have a preposition and a noun forming a noun. So fire engine is a noun. Green house is a noun. Scrub nurse is a noun. Afterthought is a noun. You could have verb compounds as well. Spoon feed, so you start with a noun verb, ends up with a verb. I spoon fed someone. I spoon feed them. I spoon feed my baby. I spoon feed my cats. So we turned a noun and a verb into a single verb. You could do this with an adjective and a verb as well. So you have whitewash. You're washing it so it's white. And that's, so you have an adjective and a verb forming a verb. So compounds can take really any combination of lexical categories and form them into nouns, adjectives, or verbs. So we could describe these in a couple ways. That this will be the last slide, so don't worry. The root or the stem that determines the category or gives kind of the majority of the meaning to the compound is called the head of the compound. So what we see with these noun compounds, especially these last three, the head is always on the right here, and they're the nouns because they're providing the category, but also most of the meaning to these compounds. So greenhouse is a type of house. So that's why house is the head. Scrub nurse is a type of nurse, so nurse is the head of the compound. So these are all right-headed compounds. And so that's another way we could describe that these compounds is based on where that head is in relation to the non-head morpheme. And if it's to the right, it's a right-headed compound, and if it's left, it's a left-headed compound. It's going to be hard to give you examples of left-headed compounds in English because most compounds in English are right-headed. Another way we can describe these compounds is an alternative to this. If the majority of the meaning is neither of the heads, then you don't have a headed compound within these compounds. You have an exocentric compound. The majority of the meaning is from outside, exo meaning outside the compound. And so a hot head is not necessarily a type of head, even though you have an adjective hot and a noun head forming hot head and a noun. The meaning isn't necessarily a head, it's a type of person. It's an angry person. A hot head is an angry person. So this would be an exocentric compound in English because it's neither hot nor head. Despite that, however, most compounds are endocentric. So this is what I had previously mentioned with all of the headed compounds to the right or the left. They're endocentric, which means the meaning is coming from within. So fire engine is a type of engine. So engine is the head. It's an endocentric right-headed compound. So we can go through each of those and say, well, I think all of them are going to be right-headed endocentric compounds. Yeah. But these are tools and words we could use to describe the different types of compounds that we have in English. And it counts as a type of derivation, but instead of deriving new words from words and affixes, you're deriving new words from words into compound words. So that does it for today. I'll leave you off with announcements happening this week. On Thursday for this class discussion, post 3 will be due. And so this has questions posted on the course website having to do with morphology and its connections to phonology and connections to other aspects of linguistics or fields of study that aren't linguistic that you're welcome to talk about. So be sure to post your discussion post and reply to a classmate's. After that, on Friday, article evaluation 1 will be due. There's information about that on the course website as well. This, of course, is for extra credit. So if you hadn't heard about it, don't worry about it. You're only going to be missing out on 2 percentage points. But if you want those 2 percentage points, get working on it now and be sure to have your article evaluation 1 submitted by Friday. Also on Friday, I'll be posting quiz 3. So this will cover what we cover today here in lecture and the readings that this lecture is based on, but also the readings and lecture for next week. And the readings and lecture for next week will be chapter 4, sections 4 through 6. So I think that's the rest of chapter 4 in contemporary linguistic analysis. Please do the readings before you finish the quiz. and you'll do well. Otherwise, you won't, because there will be things you haven't read. So that does it for today. Thank you for watching. I look forward to discussing all of these concepts with you further. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.